Much, Mr. President. I have, in fact, a point of order to ask you to change the agenda of today, because today I have to tell you I'm that sick of what is happening in Ukraine. That sick, why? Because, as you have all seen the last 20 days, there are these numerous attacks by the Russians on the ordinary cities of Ukraine, hospitals, power installations, apartment blocks. And what I find scandal is that Europe, who is opening the door for Ukraine, and the European Council is not even capable in such an urgency to decide to send a number of anti-missile systems to Ukraine. There are in total, Mr. President, Mr. Borrell told us that 100 of these Patriot systems in Europe. And they ask 7 to protect their cities. And we Europeans, we invite them to come to the European Union, but are not capable to do so. And my proposal to you, Mr. President, is that we in any way, all these discharges of all these institutions, 55 in total, that we put them on the next agenda in Strasbourg. And before we don't discharge them until the Council, who can easily make an agreement on that, do a meeting to deliver these 7 Patriot systems to Ukraine. At least the discharge of the Council, at least I propose that the discharge of the Council is withdrawn off the agenda. Thank you very much.
That was Minister of European Parliament, Guy Verhofstadt, who was demanding that the budget be removed from the agenda from an upcoming European Council meeting until Ukraine is provided with 7 additional Patriot anti-air missile systems. And that vote ended up passing 515 to 62. So they will not be effectively doing anything for funding until these 7 systems are located and on their way to Ukraine. Now, he did state a specific number, that there were 100 of these systems in Europe. And there's been some debate about whether that number is accurate. I've not been able to locate a good solid source to tell me exactly how many of these Patriot systems are in Europe and thus available for redeployment to Ukraine. However, the lowest number I've seen is 33. And if the number 100 is accurate, and according to Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, it is, then there could be 7 of those systems pulled from other locations. And
Mr. President.
This whole...
I have in fact...
sorry about that. Wrong button there. Let's flip to this right here. This was a very passionate speech calling for Europeans to effectively get off their duffs, to get busy and get this done. And just really an amazing short speech for this particular matter. And this is the fact that it passed so resoundingly is very heartening. Now, the information on the 100 system did come from Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign ministers, and he does say that some of these they've identified as being, for instance, having multiple batteries guarding a port or an airfield, and perhaps one of those can be shaken loose and sent to Ukraine instead. And while they would need 26 to create a total air shield over Ukraine, 7 are their highest priority. That way they can protect their most vital infrastructure in cities. And as he said, this would cover Ukraine's largest cities and leave 1 free to be closer to the battlefield. This just really, it really kind of made me feel good to see this happening. Now, the question is going to always be, does it happen? By the way, I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. Glad to have you here. Good to see you, Jerry, Lucille, and Robbie. Always happy to see all of you. Now, we've got a lot of stuff that's gone on today, and so let's go ahead and just jump straight into it. We're going to start with discussing Kharkiv, which, as everybody knows, has been getting hit very hard. The main thing I wanted to pull out of this Institute for the Study of War report on the situation is Ukrainian military's effective use of drones on the battlefield cannot fully mitigate Ukraine's theater-wide shortage of critical munitions. Those drones cannot be used as anti-air defense systems. They just don't have the capabilities. They don't have the speed or interception capabilities or the sensors or any of the programming or any of those things. They're not a valid replacement there. So places like Kharkiv are getting hit with bombs, and they're getting hit with just regular, glide bombs and regular bombs and, of course, rockets and missiles and everything else right now. And it's been clear that Russia is intending to wipe the town off the face of the map. There is a new evacuation being ordered around the settlements of Kharkiv, Bogodukhiv, and Izium districts close to the border with the Russian Federation. 182 children are reported to live in these designated settlements, but it does not apply to the city of Kharkiv itself. They have evacuation routes set up, and they're insisting on this evacuation. This is not an optional evacuation at this point. The Ukrainian air defenses, as I mentioned briefly, are continuing to be overstretched and under-equipped. And the Kremlin knows this quite well. And so they are exploiting this shortage while they have the opportunity to throw ballistic and hypersonic missiles at Ukraine in volume. This means they're getting through, and it's going to be a tough one for Ukraine. I did see this interesting article from The Insider. Let's go ahead and pop it open real quick here. And just the picture alone kind of tells tells the whole story right here. These kids are underground in an underground shelter trying to get their education. And you can't really have an effective education if you're constantly having to evacuate your school. On top of that, an above-ground school is vulnerable to any attack, and any attack that strikes would be devastating. The overall end result, though, is at least these kids have something that is a little bit normal. Tough though it may be, at least they have the opportunity to get an education. Another call from the Ukraine Twitter account here. Kharkiv is under constant Russian strikes. We urgently need additional Patriot and other air defense systems to save lives in Kharkiv and other cities. It's gotten to the point where over 200,000 households are without electricity in Kharkiv after all these strikes. And that segues us straight into the next major aspect, which is energy infrastructure in Ukraine is getting plastered. From Centrenergo, the Russian attacks have destroyed the big thermal power plant in Kiev Oblast. That is the Tripilia thermal power plant in the city of Ukrainka in Kiev Oblast. And the report is that the damage is total. It is 100% destroyed. Now, Centrenergo's overall produces 8% of the energy in Ukraine, and they're reporting that all of their generating capacity is offline at this point, and it will take quite some time to restore any of it to operational status. 8% doesn't seem like much, but when your overall electrical systems are already overburdened from other lacking sources, it's going to be a situation where the dominoes start to fall. Russia also attacked 2 gas storage facilities that are under the operation of Naftogaz. And the targeting, there's no reports of actual damage at this point, though they do state that the situation is under control and all involved, including their specialists and all their involved services. So we don't know if there's how extensive the damage might be, what was going on there, or if there was no significant damage at all. DTEC reported that their thermal plants were also damaged in Russia's overnight attack. And this is just part of the continuing pattern of Russia attacking vital infrastructure for Ukraine. Here's the Tripilska thermal power plant on fire. Should give you some perspective on exactly how extensive the damage is, especially this wider shot here with a severe fire reported in the engine room. Some additional videos showing some of this fire here. It's clear that this plant is effectively destroyed. As Anton Herashchenko states, this was one of the largest thermal power plants in Ukraine. And blessedly or thankfully, all the employees who worked on the shift during the attack are alive. That means still that this particular aspect of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure has lost 100% of its power generation capabilities. The German state-owned natural gas trader is still reportedly considering the possibility of storing natural gas in Ukraine again. This is after they withdrew their supplies from the storage facilities in Ukraine previously as the war initially kicked off. The European Parliament has voted to pass rules allowing member states to ban the import of Russian liquefied natural gas, according to Reuters. I would have to say, took them long enough. Now, we're gonna kind of touch on a few things here, kind of in a row here. This is a picture from World War II. In World War II, the Allies bombed Nazi Germany's oil depots as a high priority military target. And as Gabrielis Landsbergis states, that's the tweet. And I wanted to share this video for sure, so bear with me a second here. I want to get this a little bit bigger on the screen. This is a congressman discussing the situation in Ukraine and Russia with a representative of the U.S. Department of Defense while discussing Ukraine's attacks on Russian oil refineries.
When the Ukrainians hit Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, the Biden administration came out and condemned the Ukrainians for hitting Russia's oil and gas infrastructure and suggested that they should not do that again. Can you tell me why, while Russia is attacking Ukrainians' oil and gas and energy sector, why shouldn't the Ukrainians attack the Russian oil and gas and energy sector?
The issue on attacking critical infrastructure is when those are civilian targets, we have concerns because Ukraine holds itself to the highest standards of observing the laws of armed conflict, and that's one of the elements of being a European democracy.
But the Russians are attacking the oil and gas infrastructure in Ukraine, correct?
Absolutely.
And if you're going to win a war, you can't sit back and take punches and not deliver punches. So why shouldn't the Ukrainians attack the oil and gas infrastructure in Russia?
Congressman, we have concerns about striking at civilian targets when we support countries. Again, this is Ukraine's sovereign decision, but we express those concerns.
But those oil and gas infrastructures in Russia are owned by the Kremlin, correct? It's not like they're owned by a private corporation that have shareholders and private assets are being destroyed.
They are owned by private Russian citizens who are part of the Putin regime. That is correct.
I mean, it makes sense to me that we should destroy them.
Seems pretty straightforward. If you're going to be in a war, you can't exactly wage that war successfully with one hand tied behind your back. And that's what he's pointing out here, is that Russia can fire at Ukraine with impunity, that they have no restrictions on the weapons they receive from Iran, the weapons they receive from North Korea, the equipment they receive from China. But Ukraine has had limits put on their ability to use Western hardware and equipment. And even when Ukraine uses its own hardware to carry out this type of attack on a clear, strategic, reliably military asset such as oil storage and refining, the U.S. is throwing a fit. Now, there are reported reasons for that being carried out. I can't confirm that. I'm sure that if you search around, you'll find out what motivated this particular criticism. Jens Stoltenberg had no truck with this whole idea of preventing Ukraine from attacking Russia's energy infrastructure. Ukraine has the right, according to international law, for self-defense. This right is enshrined in the UN Charter, and we have the right to help Ukraine uphold the right of self-defense without making NATO and NATO allies party to the conflict. And Ukraine has part of self-defense. It's also that Ukraine has the right to strike legitimate military targets outside Ukraine to defend themselves. So this is a war aggression. Ukraine has the right to self-defense. Even the Russian propagandists really thought this was hilarious and ridiculed the Americans for condemning Ukrainian oil refinery attacks. He called it insane, and that Washington's argumentation is ridiculous, and tells about Washington's decline. A real concern that we might see. Thank you to Dmitry from More Translated for this information. Then I found a couple of additional articles that I thought were really interesting here. One of the, I'm going to call this disinformation items that has kind of managed to crawl its way out, is this idea that ethnic Bulgarians in Kherson Oblast are being targeted with Bulgarian weapons. And the Russians are really trying to sell this to the West on here. The thing is that the numbers don't make sense. The person that's providing it is a known Russian partisan shill. And in fact, they couldn't even find 3 Bulgarian speakers to go on the video and discuss it. So overall, just be advised that that's the type of fake news that's out there coming from Russia these days. They are doing anything and everything to drive wedges wherever they find a weak spot. Then there's the Russian propagandists themselves, and when they're talking to their domestic audience, they don't hold back. We are trying to change the future of Europe, which means 200 to 250 million dead and maimed Europeans. That's the price of nuclear war. So that's the long story short. Russia's not here for Ukraine. They're here for power. They're here for all of it. They're playing for all the marbles. And we didn't realize that they lost some along the way. Moving on to news out of Ukraine. The head of the Come Back Alive Foundation, Taras Chmut, has called for mobilizing Ukrainians from the age of 20. He said this in an interview with Ukrainska Pravda. In my opinion, he said, mobilization should occur from the age of 20. We've wasted too much time. If we want to survive as a country, we must face the war, accept it as a reality, and start doing something about it. Otherwise, everything is in vain. Hundreds of thousands of people who died, who were maimed, who are dying today. While we are speaking here, it's all in vain. He did call this an unpopular decision, but did say that they need to make those unpopular decisions or they will face even greater problems in the future. Ukraine recently signed a law into effect that reduced the mobilization age from 27 to 25. I do know that when the U.S. was drafting young men into war, they started at 18, and you could sign up for service before then with the permission of your parents. But overall, that's still, I don't know how to feel about it. My heart goes out to the people in Ukraine. In fact, in Ukraine, there are twice as many 40-year-old men as 20-year-old men. The share of men aged 20 to 30 is the smallest in history. And I think you see this reflected in the average age of Ukraine's military. This is a war of old men. And the young men that come through it may become Ukraine's greatest generation. But this is only something that we will be able to see in hindsight, not something that we will see in the future. Just a little reminder from Supernova Plus, Ukraine does not have a safe rear area. Enemy reconnaissance drones are already calmly flying 100 kilometers deep from the front and very quickly launching missile attacks on our target. The enemy has created an entire system for quickly making decisions on missile strikes. Scouts constantly fly over Zaporizhia, Odessa, Kharkiv, and Sumy, Nikolaev, and more. Considering the increasing capabilities of the Russians in relation to space reconnaissance, assistance from China and American companies, everyone should take this into account and take camouflage measures even in the same so-called rear area. Until we have effective anti-drone systems, the situation will only get worse. Like I said, it's pretty rough over there. And right now, Ukraine does not have enough air defense systems to knock those Russian drones out of the air. It's a challenge all the way around. And people in the rear areas are going to find that they're going to have to face these challenges directly themselves. Moving on to news out of Russia. A Russian soldier complained of huge losses in the Belgorod region. I bring this up mainly because the Russians have been carefully hiding all the information they have on the Belgorod region incursion that was done by the Freedom of Russia Legion and the other Russian groups that are anti-Putin, I should say. And he talks about taking such heavy losses that they've had to reform new brigades out of the remnants of what was left. Quite the interesting story there. Damage in the flooded regions of the Orenburg area are exceeding 40 billion rubles. That was according to Governor Denis Passler at a meeting on flood relief, with the assessment being called very preliminary. There's also still expected another increase in water level, which could flood another 3,500 houses. One serviceman was killed and 8 were injured as a result of drone attacks in the border regions. According to Astra, a Ukrainian drone allegedly dropped an explosive near the village of Begoshka, Rilsky district, Kursk region, about 3 kilometers from the border. 4 servicemen were in the immediate vicinity, received mine explosive injuries. On April 10th, there were 2 more arrivals, 1.5 kilometers from the village of Dolgoye, Belgorod region, and the outskirts of the village of Tetkino. During an attack on a military position near Dolgi, one of them was killed and the other wounded. In Tetkino, Kursk region, 3 servicemen received mine explosion injuries and shrapnel wounds. Now, some of this, just so we're clear, I think I've got this a little bit later, maybe a drone operating group that was in their workshop working with explosive materials. I know that is coming up in a little bit here, and they report that one of their own grenades went off rather than an attack. I'm just letting you know there may be a tie-in there. A drone attacked Mordovia for the first time. That's in addition to attacks on Kursk, Tambov, Belgorod, Bryansk, and Lipetsk regions. Let's take a look at this Mordovia area here and just quickly pop up a quick Google map so we can see what we're looking at here. Mordovia. Let's see, that's east. Oh, wow, southeast of Moscow. So clearly, Ukraine is managing to get their drones really quite far into Russian territory. This is some of the flooding that has reached Kuzbas. This video shows the village of Ust-Kabirza in the Kemerovo region, where the river overflowed its banks. The local resident says that their houses, animals, and small buildings were being washed away is a correct one, not that Aardman movie. And they are complaining they're not receiving any assistance. The Ministry of Emergency Situation always declares that this is all under control of the Department of Employees here, and that several dozen residents were evacuated. There are now there's no electricity in the settlement, and there are interruptions in their cell phone network. Tourists from Sochi were very surprised that in Sevastopol, the sundial shows Kiev time. The cafe plays the song Birthday by the Ukrainian group BB, and they also serve Ukrainian borscht, Polsi, and from Soloka. This is one of the things that really indicates to me that Crimeans really know which side their bread is buttered on. They recognize that they don't like what Russia's doing to their peninsula. Russian propagandists have realized something about this war in Ukraine. They admitted that they had actually lost Ukraine, and the result of the special military operation was total hatred of Russia. Ukrainians hate us. There are millions of people there for whom the meaning of existence is to take revenge on us. And as Crimean Wind stated, why would that be? All across Russian-occupied Ukraine, soldiers are shutting down places of worship that don't fit the world Vladimir Putin wants to build. From PBS NewsHour. This is probably one of the biggest disinformation or lie campaigns that Russia's putting out there right now is this concept that Ukraine is suppressing Christian religions. But reality is that Russia is the one suppressing those Christian religions. If it doesn't fit with the Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarch, then they do not want it to exist. It's not an approved religion. Let's go ahead and share this video right here. Russian authorities reported an attack on the Zelengorsk mining and processing plant, Kursk region of Russia. This video was already blurred out. I had nothing to do with that. The Mikhailovsky plant in Zelengorsk is part of the largest iron ore company in Russia, and the CIS Metalloinvest, and is one of the leaders in the Russian mining and metallurgical industry. Clearly, if you can't get the metal, you can't make the weapons. This little bit from OSN Technical, talking about Andrew Perpetua, really caught my eye. In the last 4 days, Andrew has recorded some form of film damage loss to 6 Russian SAM systems, 32 artillery systems, 40 tanks, 51 IFVs, 14 APCs, 52 trucks, 10 UTVs, 43 cars, mostly Bukanas, 9 EW systems, 2 comm systems, 2 engineering vehicles, and a boat, for a total of 262 over 4 days. That's a tremendously high loss rate for Russia. They surely can't be replacing these at the rate they're losing them. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front. And as we go into international, go ahead and chime in with any questions or comments you might have. I absolutely love reading what you guys say. It always helps kind of buoy my spirits to see you guys talking about what's going on in this war and things that I might have missed. From Russian news agency RIA, there is and cannot be any trust in Switzerland as a platform for resolving the Ukrainian crisis. The country supports Ukraine, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry. And with the recent news that Switzerland was trying to host a peace summit on the topic, it's clear that Russia wants no part in this idea of peace. France, despite their very bellicose commentary coming from President Macron, still is importing ever-increasing levels of Russian liquid natural gas. They paid $644 million for Russian gas in the first 3 months of 2024, making it the fastest-growing consumer of Russian liquid natural gas in the EU, according to Politico. But maybe it's not to last, because the European Union Parliament approves the option of allowing members to block Russian LNG imports. Then there's situations like this, and I'm going to go into a brief bit of opinion commentary as I talk about this one. Heads up. A U.S. official has declared that the U.S. is deepening cooperation with Moldova amid potential threats from Russia. That's according to Ned Price, deputy to the U.S. representative to the UN. We are redoubling our cooperation with the Moldovan government and other governments in the region, supporting their ability to spot any such activity on the part of the Russian government. Now for the brief opinion commentary here. If you can look at what the United States is doing to Ukraine right now, and they're offering to deepen their cooperation with your country, how much stock can you really put into that? And I'll leave it at that. Donald Trump has stated that he will not visit Ukraine as a presidential candidate, claiming it is inappropriate for him to visit Ukraine as he does not hold office. Strangely enough, that has not stopped him from accepting visits from Viktor Orban, as I recall, and several other foreign dignitaries. From the Freedom House, Ukraine on the democratic path amid rising authoritarianism in the region. The other day, I shared a map of various countries that were getting pretty pro-Russia lately. And if Ukraine falls, if the Russians will have created this wedge right through the heart of Europe. And Ukraine is the bright spot there. They are a democratic country. They're trying their best to have a representative form of government, to ally itself with Western powers and be free, truly. But other countries nearby are not on the same path, though some of them are making some very heartening efforts. Look at the situation with Vučić, and it looks like he's got some real protests on his hands. China has dismissed criticism over their ties with Russia, saying it's their right to normal cooperation. Normal cooperation would probably not be things like armor and artillery and other weaponry or dual-use items that they seem to be providing now, because China has truly decided their side. They don't want to truly alienate the West yet, but they are certainly rather willing to work with Russia. The Russian military illegally arrests citizen in Armenia for refusing to fight in Ukraine. This is the second such incident and is yet another challenge to Armenia's status as an independent nation. In a speech before a joint session of Congress, Japan Prime Minister Kishida warns that Ukraine of today may be East Asia of tomorrow. Once again, other world leaders are linking what's going on in the world in the various regions together to show that this is truly interconnected. Let's go ahead and listen to what he had to say here.
Needs the United States. The world needs the United States to continue playing this pivotal role in the affairs of nations. And yet, as we meet here today, I detect an undercurrent of self-doubt among some Americans about what your role in the world should be. This self-doubt is arising at the time when our world is at history's turning point. The post-Cold War era is already behind us, and we are now at an inflection point that will define the next stage of human history.
At the very least,
hang on a second. I've got something else playing at the same time, and I don't know where it's at.
And the enemies of freedom everywhere will be emboldened. Beijing will be emboldened.
Bear with me a second. I'm going to have to find it.
Islamists in the Middle East will be emboldened.
Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and bop back to the beginning of this one and replay.
The world needs the United States to continue playing this pivotal role in the affairs of nations. And yet, as we meet here today, I detect an undercurrent of self-doubt among some Americans about what your role in the world should be. This self-doubt is arising at the time when our world is at history's turning point. The post-Cold War era is already behind us, and we are now at inflection point that will define the next stage of human history. The international order that the U.S. worked for generations to build is facing new challenges. Challenges from those with values and principles very different from ours. Freedom and democracy are currently under threat around the globe.
I'm not sure I can express how much it troubles me that we have to see foreign leaders address our own lawmakers and remind them of exactly who they are and what their role in the world is. It's amazing to me when you really think about it. Japan was our enemy in World War II, along with Germany, and yet Japan sees us, the United States, not as an enemy, because we have worked with them for so long now. We're not just a friend, we're not just an ally, but we are a beacon of hope. When they look at us and say, you're at a turning point and you have self-doubts, maybe we should listen. Because these are the people that are going to know how we are when we're at our best and when we're at our worst. That's enough color commentary on that for me. Let's go ahead and go into this situation on the front lines. Only one major change over here on the deep state map. That is this change in Novomikhailivka, which shows that Russia has taken much of the central section of the village. There's a few other changes here in Zaporizhia. The War Gonzo, which is a Russian source, is reporting that they have a toehold in Robotyne, though they have provided no video proof, and they even hedge their bets here. Progress, although small, is there. It is likely that after lengthy positional battles, the Russian armed forces decided to increase the pressure and seize the initiative. Whether this really is so will become clear in the near future. He talks about Novomikhailivka and the situation in Bakhmut, where the Russians continue to push towards Chasiv Yar. Null Reports shows only one major change at this point in time, and it's really a minor one. It shows Russian advances north of Berdichi, taking control over the fields east of the ponds. And it looks like the Russians intend to clear this area between Berdichi and the railway tracks and push towards Novobakhmutivka. And finally, on the front lines, we're kind of burning through this today, so bear with me a second here. Let's pop this back, mute that. Robotyne, a possible sign of growing equipment shortages. Russian forces attempt an assault on Ukrainian positions using a pair of lightly up-armored Ural 4320 transport trucks to cross the open ground. Both were destroyed. So that's Russia may be throwing bodies and whatever equipment they can at Robotyne right now, but they may be running out. On the other hand, maybe they're using this to drain Ukraine's resources and then push in with a heavier assault later on. That would not necessarily surprise me. In the area of this whole war starting to blend together and become related in each other's way, I want to point out one item out of the Institute for the Study of War's report on Iran and Israel. And that is that Asaib al-Haq Secretary General Qais al-Khazali hinted on April 10th that Iranian-backed Iraqi militias could resume attacking U.S. forces if the Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani's upcoming visit to Washington, D.C. fails to facilitate the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq. And the reason I bring this up is because it's clear that the overall plan for all of these enemies is to push the U.S. out of all of these regions, where the U.S. is a counterbalance to the evil of these nations. And once again, I want to point this out. According to BBC Russian, quoting Joe Biden, if Iran attacks, our support for Israel will be ironclad. Considering the situation overall between Ukraine and Gaza, how much can they rely on that right now? That's what scares me. Moving on to the interesting extras. O.J. Simpson, the famous American actor and athlete, has actually passed away from cancer. Thought that was just an interesting aside. No further commentary. A little bit of interesting side note here, the flooding in the Orenburg region. They're starting to come up with some creative ways to save their equipment and vehicles. In this case, this man strapped a bunch of beer casks all around his vehicle and used it to float it above the floodwaters, and thus was able to save his car and some of the materials inside. Either he's an avid beer drinker, or he's just happened to have a squirreling away of a whole bunch of these beer bottles or beer kegs of sorts. Quite the life hack there, as they say. Russia finally managed to launch their Angara A5 rocket from the Vostochny Cosmodrome. This has been canceled multiple times previously. And this the flight goes well. They're hoping to launch the spacecraft into orbit later on. A little video of Ukrainian UH-60A Blackhawks in service with Ukraine. I love helicopters. I love airplanes. I love aviation. So it's nice to see them in action every once in a while. I don't know why I kept this one, to be honest. So let's move on. Another video for you. I've got them chock full today. Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia. The Ukrainians are fighting for everyone's freedom. If Russia wins, there will be a new Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe, and authoritarians across the world will be emboldened. The West must supply Ukraine with the weaponry to win. It's a 1-minute video. Let's go ahead and listen.
Absolutely crystal clear. The Ukrainians aren't just fighting for their own freedom, they're fighting for everyone's freedom. They're fighting for everyone's freedom. If Putin wins, at the very least, there will be a new Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe, and the enemies of freedom everywhere will be emboldened. Beijing will be emboldened. The apocalyptic Islamists in the Middle East will be emboldened. So this really is a critical moment for the West, and the last thing we should be doing is effectively forcing the Ukrainians to capitulate by refusing to give them the weaponry they need, not just to survive, but to win. And this has been the problem. Too many people have not been prepared to give the Ukrainians the weapons they need to do the job they want to do for their own country's future survival.
Yep. Briefly here, let's delve into just kind of this concept here, and what determines the difference between a manager and a true leader is how they react to a crisis. And we've seen in several recent leaders that when the crisis actually hits, when the stuff hits the fan, when things go south and they just keep going souther, that some of our leaders have not risen to the occasion. That makes them managers. They might be very effective at managing the affairs of the country, or they might not be. But when the true emergency finally hits, that is when you find out what your true leaders, who they really are. John Seifer, a retired CIA officer, says if you want to understand Russian power, listen to the people who leave it. Secret Russian sources almost always make the choice to help the West after concluding that their system is evil and must be destroyed. So truly, you can understand what type of people we're dealing with in this situation. And we're going to end off with these photographs right here. Residents of Kiev taking shelter on the metro during night shelling. And that is everything for today. Thank you for joining me. I always appreciate having you here. And we're going to end off at this point. So again, thank you. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.